Kenneth Helphand is the Knight Professor of Landscape Architecture at the University of Oregon, where he's taught courses in landscape history, theory, and design since 1974. He's a graduate of Brandeis University and Harvard's Graduate School of Design, the recipient of distinguished teaching awards from the University of Oregon and the Council of Educators in Landscape Architecture. He's the author of numerous award-winning books. Please welcome my friend, Kenny Helphand.
Wow, what an amazing morning. Woo. So I have to follow Susan, who was a good friend, and I have to follow my rabbi. Okay. By the way, if you want to hear more from her, just services every Friday night. And I appreciate the conference title, which is The Evolving Landscape, so you have a landscape architect to fit within that. Raise your hand if you have a garden. Whoa. Raise your hand if you've ever had a garden. Keep all of them up. Okay. I'm going to talk about gardens, but I'm going to talk about the meaning of gardens. In 1918, in the middle of the First World War, Siegfried Sassoon, the British poet, interviewed Winston Churchill, who was then the Minister of Munitions. And in the course of that interview, Churchill said, "War is the normal occupation of man." And as you might imagine, Sassoon didn't really like that statement, and he went back to Churchill, and Churchill added a remarkable caveat. Churchill said, "War and gardening as the normal occupation of man." You can think of that as the classic dichotomy of the poles of war and peace, also the poles of human experience, the poles of destruction and violence versus creation and tranquility. This is the cover of what I'm going to talk about in my book, Defiant Gardens. Gardens created during war are examples of what I've called defiant gardens. This garden was built in a bomb crater during the Blitz during the Second World War in front of Westminster Cathedral. Defiant gardens are gardens in deserts, prisons, hospitals, highway medians, vacant lots, refugee camps, rooftops, wastelands, even the cracks in the sidewalk. What are they? Defiant gardens are gardens created in extreme or difficult economic, environmental, political, or cultural situations. They represent acts of adaptation to their challenging circumstances, but you can also look at them as viewed from other dimensions, sites of assertion and affirmation and human resilience. These are gardens now in contemporary Detroit. Typically, in the popular imagination, we think of the gardens as place of repose, a refuge, a respite from the indoors, the city, culture, and civilization, where the garden represents the out of doors, the non-human, and the world of nature. This is a garden in a refugee camp in Chechnya. My premise was similar to the way that psychologists, philosophers, and theologians have looked at people in the most extreme circumstance, that if I looked at gardens in the most extreme circumstance, it might reveal something about the essence of the meaning of gardens, the same way that those psychologists, etc., learned something about the essence of the human condition. Gardens are often seen as a luxury, a frill, or a pastime, or a leisure time pursuit, and not as a basic component of human existence. The beauty of the garden may in fact mask its deeper messages. These gardens are gardens right now in a refugee camp in northern Jordan of Syrian refugees. So what are the implications of Churchill's statement about war and gardening? There are many kinds of defiant gardens. I began this investigation actually from this image, which were gardens created behind the trenches in the First World War. Any garden is conditioned by its context, and the meaning changes in terms of the context. So a normal little vegetable garden that you have in your backyard is very nice. Imagine it in relationship to no man's land or in the middle of a highway. So I examined gardens in 4 situations. Gardens built behind the trenches in the First World War, gardens built in Warsaw and other ghettos under the Nazis in World War II, gardens built by prisoners of war, and gardens constructed in this country by Japanese Americans interned during World War II. From looking at these gardens, made during the horrors and tribulations of war, 5 deceptively simple themes arose. Gardens are about life, home, hope, work, and beauty. Gardens are alive, they're a connection to home, they embody hope, they're places of work, and they're sites of artistry. These are, of course, commonplace themes, but they're amplified in the context of wartime. The gardens speak to us. Many of us have had a friend or a relative who are congenial and they're nice to have around, and then they respond with a depth of emotion and feeling in a time of crisis. I think gardens are like that. There are comfortable companions, but they have capacities that lie dormant, awaiting a crisis to release, to activate their potential. I'm going to tell you a few short stories, as our previous speakers have. It's the Warsaw Ghetto in 1942. In the ghetto, there was 500,000 people not living, 500,000 people imprisoned in less than a square mile. There was a group called the Toporol that organized, acquired land, they organized seeds, equipment, and they raised funds, and they planted over 200 gardens in the ghetto. Not just vegetable gardens for food, they also planted flowers. This group had bylaws. In their bylaws, they wrote the following: we are to instill in the children an aesthetic appreciation of their surroundings, direct their attention to growing plants that might bring them closer to nature and provide them with aesthetic experiences. This is in the Warsaw Ghetto in 1942. In the Lodz Ghetto, also in Poland, the walls wrapped around an area that was semi-rural that was divided into garden plots. A man named Roman Kent, who I met, told me his story. He was about 15 during this time, and he and his brother had a garden in the ghetto. And one evening, starvation was so rampant that the inhabitants went and pulled up everything that was growing there. And he sat there sobbing, he said, because realizing just another day or a week, there would have been literally more food for people. Yet he still described the garden as a lifeline to life, essential to his family's survival. A couple of years ago, I met a man named Dr. John Creech in North Carolina. He was a very famous horticulturalist, at one time the director of the National Arboretum, and he told me his story. His story was he was an American soldier in World War II. He's captured by the Germans in North Africa, ends up at a POW camp in Poland where there's a derelict greenhouse. He convinced the Germans to allow him to refurbish it. He gets seeds from the Red Cross, and he gardens. For this, he's the only American soldier. He won the Bronze Star for gardening. Okay? And immediately after the war, in Better Homes and Gardens, he wrote this article, "I Gardened for My Life." Rather interesting. Okay. Soldiers hope not to be mortally wounded. They hope to survive. They hope for peace. The soldier's primal fear is death and a return to the earth. A garden, any plant emerging from the ground, is a sign of regeneration, of life emerging. Home. We have deep attachments to the place we call home. Gardens are part of our home or reminders of homes we've inhabited. This is from a New Zealand soldier imprisoned in Germany and Poland during the war, and his drawings here imagining this bungalow, this home that he hopes to return to. At the Ruhleben camp, a prisoner of war camp for civilian internees in World War I just outside of Berlin, a set of 7,000 British and Commonwealth prisoners converted this camp into the semblance of an English village. They even formed a chapter of the Royal Horticultural Society. Gardens are a form of domesticating space. So Japanese Americans in this country, in turn, took a vacant canvas of the series of 10 camps, largely in the American West, and they converted them. They took possession of them through their labor, their design, their creativity, and their cultural signification. For people who'd just been dispossessed, this was an important fact. The beauty of the gardens that they created offered solace and a contrast with an alien desert environment. They were acts of resistance dedicated towards the maintenance of their cultural integrity and self-respect. They created an anti-camp. These were great American gardens. In the Minidoka camp in southern Idaho, there were many skilled designers. One individual, if you look here at the edge, there's the edge of a camp, you see a torii gate. In the middle of that, you see a series of sagebrush where Mr. Nishida bonsai'd the sagebrush. He essentially converted it into a kind of Japanese site. Okay? Also at Minidoka, there's the story of the Kogita garden. Mr. Kogita, the individual on the far left in this image, was from Seattle, where he had a large garden. And in the camps, he created a large stone garden, which allowed him to endure this circumstance. After the war, ironically, our government sent people back to their homes, and they sent his garden back, including a 1-ton rock, which he re-erected in front of his house. And after he died, it ended up at his son's house, who you see here, where that garden now sits as a family heirloom. A few years ago in Bogota, I met a Senor Luis Antonio Medina and his roof garden, which he created in a squatter settlement at the edge of the city of Bogota, where he described that the garden was a reminder to him, of his life in the countryside, that he had to leave due to the violence that was there. Italian POWs in World War II in Australia created a model, of course. They built a model of the Colosseum as a reminder of their home. American soldiers during the first Gulf War in a base in Saudi Arabia there were 500 tents here. Within 2 weeks, I was told in the front of every single tent, there was essentially the semblance of a garden or a yard with great ingenuity trying to create something, really some semblance and reminder of home. Gardens take time to conceive, to make, develop, and grow. But since time immemorial, cultures have wondered of the fact you take a seed, you plant it into the dark earth, it emerges out into the life. Hope is embodied in that transformation. Hope is preparation for the future. Hope is not naive optimism. Hope has habits of persistence, resourcefulness, and courage. A few years ago, I sat listening to a woman named Esther Mishkin, who, as a teenager, survived the Kovno ghetto. In this ghetto, her father had a garden. I asked her, did you work in the garden? She said, no, I didn't. But her father used to sit there just looking at the garden, and she said, it gave him the feeling that something is growing, that we could survive somehow. She was the only survivor. Nelson Mandela, imprisoned for a good portion of his life in South Africa, had a garden in his prison on Robben Island, and he said about it, and this is written in his autobiography, a garden was one of the few things in prison that one could control. To plant the seed, to watch it grow, to tend it and harvest it, offered a small but enduring satisfaction. The sense of being a custodian of this small patch of earth offered a small taste of freedom. Garden is a verb as well as a noun. It's an activity as well as a place. And that activity can carry equal, sometimes greater meaning than the place itself. Defiant gardens are the product of defiant gardening. Defiant gardens emphasize work's broader meaning. Work can be productive. It also keeps your mind and body busy. It's something to do. It offers dignity, self-respect, and identity. Mr. Inouye, in an intern camp in this country in the West, said about these amazing gardens that were created by this community, he said, well, we were Japanese after all, so no one spent lazy days. You're looking at an image here of Warrant Officer Brooke Turner, 2004 in Iraq. Someone's shaking their head. They've seen this image because it appeared in the Oregonian, and in fact, the Register Guard, because he was from Oregon. He was from Oregon, but was stationed in Hawaii. And he said about this plot of land that he was cultivating, he said, usually after work, I'll water the backyard, and he's talking about stateside, and listen to the radio barefoot and just relax and feel the cool grass. I thought if I planted some grass, I could still do that in a silly kind of way. Well, he acquired seeds, planted grass, it didn't take, and somehow this man acquired sod in Iraq. Our soldiers couldn't get everything they need, but he got sod. Should have been a quartermaster, okay? Okay. You're looking here at Sergeants Carl Quam and Justin Wansack from the North Dakota National Guard, also in Iraq, outside of Tikrit. And when I asked Sergeant Quam about his garden, he said, well, we were missing home, farming, and the joy of growing something. They were farmers back home. So they had seeds donated from back home. They tried that. It didn't work. They got advice from local Iraqi gardeners. And then Sergeant Quam said, engaged in garden time. And it's what he called the evening after returning from perilous combat patrol missions. The temperature, he said, was 140 degrees. He said it was good therapy to relax after a day of dodging roadside bombs. It was a release, a time to put all that was happening for that little time in the evening. Things seem right, things seem real. A wish is a desire, often of what we know is unlikely. Gardens are such places. They're built wishes, hope made material. Gardens are beautiful. Thus, in war, the antithesis of the beautiful, the common garden can become the highest art. The story of Gerda Klein. What you're looking here is a scarecrow in the garden of the hospital of the Lutch Ghetto, complete with a yellow star. Her story was she was, during the Second World War, as a young woman imprisoned in a series of concentration camps and slave labor camps. And one day at the slave labor camp where 2,000 young women every morning were marched from their barracks to the factory, and they'd walk by the commandant's garden where there was a rose garden, and she knew if they just went out and tried to touch it or smell it, they would instantly be shot. Then she described how one morning a crocus had broken through the concrete and 2,000 young women walked like that around it, not wanting to extinguish its life. This man is Bill Beardall. During the Vietnam War, he was a helicopter pilot, and he wrote to me about his garden. His garden is that little plot of land with the banana growing in the middle of it. He said about his garden, it had a calming effect on me. After a long day of flying missions in the I-Corps area, to see a little bit of green growing by my doorway, as small as it was my oasis. Gardens are ephemeral. It's rare that any garden outlives its maker. If I learned anything from this study, it doesn't matter how big a garden is, it can be a flower pot, or how long it lasts. It could be just a glimpse of something can be meaningful to people. Nature always returns and eventually obscures the evidence of human action, even of the most horrific kind. It may be rapid, a season, or over generations, but ultimately culture becomes compost. Sarajevo was a city once renowned for the peaceful relationships amongst its various ethnic and religious communities. But between 1992 and 1995, 10,000 Sarajevans were killed and 50,000 wounded. In the year 2000, the American Service Friends Service Committee established a community gardening project in Bosnia and Herzegovina, founded by the man in the striped shirt and sitting by the table there, a man named Dvorin. The symbolic presence of these gardens is powerful, as gardens have been created in former minefields and killing grounds. To work in these gardens, residents need to meet two conditions. The first, they have to be poor enough that they need the produce from the garden for themselves, and hopefully they can sell something at the marketplace. But secondly, every garden must have a constituency of Serbs, Croats, and Bosnians. So the garden is also a project in reconciliation and re-socialization. SIAM, which was the acronym for the Founding Cooperative of Modern Architects in the 1930s in Europe, had a saying: how can one think about roses when the forests are burning? In other words, how can one do something beautiful and wonderful and significant when the world is being destroyed all around you? They then answered their own question. They said, how can one not plant roses when the forests are burning? Gardens always ask us this most elementary question. For the forests are always burning, and we always need to plant roses. Thank you. This is Kids Gardens in Detroit. Thank you.